and welcome to the Hurling Show, brought to you by eFrontiers, the IT recruitment specialists. If you're interested in getting your CV in, you know the way things are at the moment, go send your CV into our game at e-frontiers.com, the recruitment specialist. Michael Verney, it's possibly going to be the greatest weekend of hurling in a long, long time. The flip side is it a damn squib? Are there too many scores? And also, why do games have to clash on TV at the weekend? Could we not have gone two hurling matches on Saturday and two on Sunday?
No, it's a bit of a killer with Kilkenny and Dublin clashing on GA Go, which obviously only some people will have. Then it's clashing with Cork and Waterford on Sky Mix, which thankfully most people have now. It's a bit of a disaster because there's only a certain amount of hurling games, and ideally you want them all live. As regards damn squib, no, it will not be a damn squib. Championship games, even last weekend, even though it might not have had the same championship feel to it, and there was no people there, obviously, it's brilliant to have it. And Saturday will be taken up by hurling, and even the big game on Sunday there. It's building up to a nice little crescendo on Sunday by the time that game throws in. Like that's the marquee game of the weekend. It's two All-Ireland contenders, obviously the Munster champions, the double league champions, and the 2018 All-Ireland champions coming up against the 2019 All-Ireland champions. It's a perfect way to finish a great weekend of hurling.
Yeah, it's unreal. It's mouth-watering. But we're also going to look at the Joe McDonagh, Christy Ring, Nicky Rackard and Laurie Maher Cups as well. It's not just all the top level here, as most people who are regular viewers will know. So just a quick recap on what happened last weekend. Limerick battered Clare by 10 points, 36 points to 123. Now, Clare did put up a good fight for a while, and obviously they were overly reliant on Tony Kelly. But I think it kind of finished predictably enough in the sense that Clare did fall away. Whereas Dublin, they avenged last year's defeat to Laois in the qualifiers with a 231 to 23 point win, and that was by 14 points. That was quite comprehensive. Laois made a bit of a comeback during the second half, but ultimately Dublin were on top throughout. Dublin Kilkenny this weekend. Now, 3:45 at Croke Park. What are your thoughts on this one? I mean, the sense is that, is this going to be the same recurring theme for Dublin now, where they put up a serious fight? Like, it's all blood and thunder for them, some good scores, all that kind of stuff, put themselves in contention. But like last year, they had themselves in a sort of a winning position early enough in the game, early into the second half. Kilkenny took over, and then with 15 minutes to go, the result wasn't really in doubt. The year before, Dublin had themselves in a great position, winning going into injury time, and lost. So is it going to be the same thing again? Dublin put themselves in position with the effort they put in, but ultimately the classic Kilkenny comes out on top.
Well, at least they know that Greg Kennedy won't be able to turn the game this year because he's not let onto the pitch, so there'll be no shenanigans or anything like that going on. But like Dublin have shown themselves to be unbelievably good, for 60, 65 minutes, and they've kind of faded out. They looked in control. I think they were 5 up at half time last year in that game, and then kind of TJ and Colin Fennelly kind of took over in the second half. Remember, TJ snapped the ball at one stage into Colin. They played a lovely little 1-2 and got a goal between them. They're going to be very, very hard stopped again. I see Dublin being competitive, but I probably see Kilkenny having them at arm's length a bit more for the duration of the game rather than just pulling away after 60 minutes or something like that. But it is an advantage for Dublin to have played a game and to have learned a lot, to have gotten up a lot of confidence. Like, if Dublin were coming into the game against Kilkenny cold and with no practice match under their belt, no competitive games for 7 or 8 months, you'd probably be a lot more worried. And I'd say the handicap would probably be bigger than the 5 that it is. But the fact that they're coming in now, they should be in confident mood. Guys like Conor Burke, guys like Donald Burke, Donald Burke has had unbelievable potential over the last couple of years. As probably, like in a championship game, he hasn't really been around for maybe big championship games and got the chance to perform. So he obviously put up a massive performance. I don't expect him to be anyway nearly as influential maybe against Kilkenny, because I think they'll try and snuff him out an awful lot more and he won't get that much space. But they are coming in with an awful lot of confidence, and as we talked about on the Monday show, they have that bench now. They probably have the experience that would have started. Maybe Trolley or Dillon will start, but they have the experience of Mark Schutte, Liam Rush, Eamon Dillon probably to come on. They're just going to try and have to make sure that they're in the game. I think probably Matty's probably looked at that as well and seen we've been very good for 60 or 65 minutes. Then not that we faded out, but other teams have got on top. Whereas now maybe they have more experienced players to come in and maybe try and help them tip the balance. But I'm very, very strong on Kilkenny for the weekend. I just think they've developed a panel over the last couple of years, and I think with the form TJ, Colin Fennelly coming into it, Richie Hogan's fit, John Donnelly, Walter Welch, Billy Ryan, Owen Cody in the forward line. I just think they're going to have too much firepower for them.
Yeah, and like Killian Buckley, he was an injury concern coming into this with a broken thumb. What I'm hearing is that he might be okay for this game. Billy Ryan is apparently moving very well, and I'd be interested to see if he'd go into the full forward line. He's got that pace, came on against Tipperary last year. Remember once or twice, certainly once, running away from Pádraig Maher with that pace, and there is a scoring threat in him, and maybe even a goal threat too. So this could be a big year for him. I mean, you can never have too many lads that are 6'1", give or take, and have a bit of pace about them and a scoring threat. So I wonder, will he step up this year? TJ Reid, we know, is arguably the best player in the country at the moment, and Colin Fennelly is, such a great target man. But the way you were talking about Kilkenny having developed this great panel, if you take TJ Reid and Colin Fennelly out of it, which of course you aren't on the day, but are these players match winners that you're talking about that they've brought through in the last couple of years? Adrian Mcmullen potentially is one, but we don't know if he's going to be right for his cruciate just yet. When I spoke with DJ Carey on an interview in our game a few weeks ago, he was saying more if we get deeper into the championship. So I would sort of question whether that depth in the panel is quite as strong as you're making out.
The way I put it is this, Shane. TJ and Colin Fennelly are going to take so much attention that there is going to be more opportunities for those guys in the wings and guys in the corner. And I just think they're better placed. Like John Donnelly was brilliant in the semi-final and final last year. And now he's had another year under his belt. A player like John Donnelly maybe wouldn't have been maybe the best conditioned player. Now he's another kind of level, and he should have gone to another level of condition now at this stage. It's still like Walter Walsh usually would be, stop Walter and maybe TJ, stop them on the puck out. Now it's a case of TJ is requiring that much attention, and he will require that much attention from, I'm not sure who they're going to get to pick up, but whoever picks him up, and Colin's going to require a lot of attention, that more opportunities arise for those other players. If you look at, we'll just say the Ballyhale county final against Dixborough, Colin Fennelly mightn't have went to town, but there was more attention on him. It allows other players to prosper, be it Owen Cody or whatever. So if they've strengthened the corners and the wings, particularly in the attack, I just think there's way more opportunities for them. While they mightn't be match winners, the chances of those guys, getting 3 or 4 points, and one corner forward getting 3 or 4 points, or 1-2, one wing forward getting more opportunities, hitting 4 or 5 points, definitely takes an awful lot of the load out of 2 boys at 11 and 14.
I can see Owen O'Donnell matching up with Colin Fennelly here, and Matty Kenny just saying, look, Owen, you have to win this battle. And I think
Shane, just on that, 2 bulls going up against each other. 2 absolute bulls going up against each other.
Well, this is the thing. This is quite different from a club championship where you're saying that a team will have to plan and put extra guys around Colin Fennelly. I think in this situation, Matty Kenny probably has one of a couple of full-backs in the country. Put Dahi Regan, not Dahi Regan, maybe 20 years ago. Put Davey Burke in that conversation. He's got a full-back who could go mano a mano. Now, you might lose, Colin Fennelly might get a goal, he might win a penalty, he might do a bit of damage. Certainly, he's really hard to tie down. But I think if you were going to take a gamble, if you were to have a full-back in the country that might be able to go toe-to-toe with him, it might be Owen O'Donnell. Now, maybe Paddy Smith will be on him, but I would suspect Owen O'Donnell is the man for him. Paddy Smith had a tough time at times against Ross King the other day. So if you have Owen O'Donnell going mano a mano on Colin Fennelly, and you had Dara Gray, who was the man marker against Paddy Purcell last week. Now, TJ Reid is obviously another level onto any player in the country. But I think Matty Kenny's certainly going to identify matchups, and I think those are 2 key ones. Now, I spoke with Dotsie O'Callaghan about this as well, and you can check out that video. But do you suspect that they could be the matchups, and maybe Sean Moran, who did operate at wing back or in the half back line despite wearing number 8 the last day, that he might go and pick up Wally Walsh as much as anything just because he can compete with him for puckouts?
Laois obviously played a sweeper from the start the other day, so that kind of forced Dublin's hand that they had to play a sweeper. Do you think they'll go back to playing 7, which they have done before, and even Sean Moran could go back and possibly say sweeper, or will they leave Conor Burke as sweeper? Like, what do you think there? Because if they do play 7, they're obviously they might concede a bit more from out the field, but the chances of conceding, we'll say, a couple of big goals maybe to a Colin Fennelly, and you're just you're telling Owen O'Donnell you're just bald headed on him, and if you can break ball, there's going to be someone around to sweep it up, and you're going to be man marking, we'll say a TJ as well. Do you think that's kind of likely, just given that, like Owen O'Donnell did it before? I think they played 7 in Parnell Park a couple of years ago under Pat Gilroy as well, and O'Donnell kept TJ very quiet, so it'd be interesting.
He did, yeah. He kept him quiet out in the half forward line. So there is that option for Dublin. I think what will happen is, if Kilkenny has 6 players in the Dublin half of the field, Dublin will have 6 players back there. But what we know happens with Kilkenny, as happens with Limerick, and other teams have obviously aped that too. You're going to withdraw your half forwards out the field. You'll probably just leave 2 inside. So it will be crazy from Dublin's point of view to just leave 2 on 2 if, for example, you had Colin Fennelly and Billy Ryan, for example, maybe TJ Reid, whoever in there in the forward line. I think it would be crazy from a Dublin point of view to just go 2 on 2 there. So they're not necessarily playing a sweeper if they left Conor Burke or Sean Moran back there. They're just not, allowing themselves to have so many players shoved outside the 45 and exposing themselves at the back. So they'll try and hold their line a little bit. So I think they'll generally have 6 players in their own half of the field. I don't see them going with 7 backs. What I see is Dublin playing, if they were to mimic the forward line they had the last week, Davy Keogh and Ronan Hayes as a 2-man inside line. Donald Burke will kind of maybe flit out around, have a bit of a free role, and then you might see Danny Sutcliffe and Cian Boland dropping in towards midfield, given protection so that Sean Moran and so that the rest of the backs can sit back. So I think it'll work that way. You're going to have matchups that Dublin will identify, as I've just explained, and after that it'll be a case of 2 men inside and everyone else, we need to win that middle 8. But just to even kind of build on that a little bit more, we were looking at some of the stats that Brian McDonnell, that he did. He's a journalist from Tipperary, and he does some great analytics, and I'm just going to bring him up on screen here. You might have a look at the puck out inclination yourself. So just to bring him up on screen. And it's very interesting, some of the trends here. And one is that Kilkenny, this is what percentage of their own puck out did each team deliver into contested area of the field on average. Now Kilkenny, 77% of their puck outs, they're going long into a contested area. And that is quite a striking figure. If you look at the other end of the scale, now Westmeath, they're going to be in the Joe McDonagh this year, and obviously put 36% in the contested area, so they've more than flipped it the other way around. It's very interesting and very telling. Like Tipperary 54%, but Kilkenny up there at 77%, and Dublin it was 46 to 54. So it's not far off an extra quarter of them, or an extra. That there's a huge discrepancy between Dublin and Kilkenny there.
Massive. If you look at, so Kilkenny are only hitting to a free man on the puck out 23% of the time. So I don't know. I actually think it's funny because Brian has done it on the Senior Hurling Championship. And I think if you did it on the league, they would have been much higher going to a free man. Because I recall watching loads of games where Rowan Murphy was hitting it to a cornerback or hitting it to a wing back. But as can happen, and I'd say like Brian Cody is a traditionalist at the end of the day. And when push comes to shove in championship games, he does seem to want it to go an awful lot more direct. But that's 23% hitting it to a free man, whereas Dublin were hitting it to a free man 46% of the time in championship hurling last year, which is nearly half the time. Maybe some of the times would have been maybe because they were playing, a 7 defender at times, and they might have had an extra man back there. And you mentioned about Westmeath, they hit it to the free man 64% of the time, because a lot of the time they would have been playing an extra man back, particularly playing against some of the higher profile teams. But it just kind of shows you Kilkenny's style has changed, but it's still quite traditional, particularly from the puckouts. They still go long and direct. Dublin go shorter, 2-1 compared to Kilkenny. So there's still a bit. They have shifted tactically, but maybe not as much sometimes as you would think, especially from the puckouts.
Yeah, we're going to go on to talk about Wexford and Galway in a couple of minutes. But even just to point out that Wexford have 35% of these puckouts going to unmarked players. And generally we consider that they're going to have that extra man back, or Kevin Foley back around the D minding the house. I would have thought that would have been a nice bit higher. But maybe
it's funny though, Shane, isn't it though? Because we talked about the Leinster final regularly. Like every ball went down the middle. I don't think there was a sharp puck out in the game because they tried to take Pádraig Walsh out of the game and did so really, really effectively.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely it. So in the heel of the hunt, where do you think Dublin can get some advantage here? I don't know about starting Davy Keogh and Ronan Hayes in the full forward line together, because the last day between them, I think Davy Keogh got a point late on in the game. Ronan Hayes, I think, shows very well for the ball. Sometimes I thought the deliveries were almost too far into the corner flag. Someone would be looking for a diagonal, which always favours the forward. You don't want the ball coming at you so that if you miss it, it's gone. You want it kind of coming cross field so that you can kind of judge your run and sort of meet it nicely, and you even have a second chance to gather it if you don't quite get it. But I think too many times it was going all the way out to the sideline. So he had so much work to do when he tried to turn and score. Remember we talked about that before with Seamus Callanan a couple of years ago. The deliveries weren't always where they really need to be so that it's immediate danger once it's in his hand. But if Ronan Hayes and Davey Keogh, like Davey Keogh isn't necessarily someone who's going to score 1-5 for you. Like he's a really good player, and like he'll take the man on. He's great work rate and all that. But I wonder, is there a temptation on Matty's behalf to gamble on Eamon Trollier-Dillon, who I think has probably solidified his position as an impact sub by scoring 1-1 the last day, rather than actually getting himself in as a starter. Mark Schutta's form is sometimes up and down. We know he's capable of shooting the lights out. Would he kind of chance maybe putting him in there? Liam Rush. If we had seen him playing in a couple of games and we thought this guy's hopping off the sod, he'd certainly start full forward. Like even the bother he caused in Nolan Park last year catching high ball. Based on what you saw, would you start him? I'm not sure I would. But what I'm saying is, I think Davey Keogh and Ronan Hayes, there mightn't be enough scores in there against this Kilkenny team. Yeah, no,
I kind of agree with that. And when you ally that to the fact that Chris Cummey's not a natural forward, like I don't see him getting 3 points against a Kilkenny defence. I don't see him getting that kind of space in a Kilkenny defence, even though I would have some question marks. It looks like it's going to be an all O'Loughlin's spine. So it looks like Hugh Lawler, who was 3 last year, is going to be full back again. And Paddy Deegan, looks like potentially he's going to be centre back. I believe he's played centre back in their 2 challenge games. I'm not sure if he's a natural centre back. And remember, we did see in the All Ireland final last year, like he was probably one of the biggest culprits of driving ball down to the free man, which is, if a centre back is going to be your quarterback, that's not what you want. You're looking for 20 and 30 yard passes and going through the lines. So I'd have a bit of a question mark there. It probably looks like they're going to play Pádraig Walsh, either wing back or midfield, probably wing back, and to try and get him on more ball maybe, and have him be less positioned, if you know what I mean. Have him driving forward from half back and not have to worry about position as much. But I'm just not sure where Dublin are going to get joy in their attack. Like if Donald Burke is kept quiet, and I do expect him to be a lot quieter than he was last Saturday night, I'm not sure if they have that spread of scorers there to basically make up for, like as you said, the two guys inside are very good hurlers, but I don't think one of them's going to get 1-3 or 1-4 from you, not against a seasoned enough defence. So that would be my worry. I know they shot the lights out last week and scored 231, but I can't see them getting up near that this week, and I'm just not sure where the scores are going to come from. I just don't think they're going to get enough scores to be winning the game. Particularly, I don't think they have enough lads that are massive game changers in attack. Yeah, I mean, I think Keane Boland will get a bit of joy in this game. I've always rated him, and it's just injuries has held him back a bit. Danny Sutcliffe, if he can sort of know when to go with the ball and know when to let the ball go, I think he can do damage. Like we all know his potential. I think Chris Crummy will win ball. Like his sheer size. I mean, we've talked about before that Kilkenny used to have this unbelievably dominant half back line in the air. But I think he can get joy. Like the size profile of that Kilkenny half back line and the amount of high ball they win probably isn't as big as it used to be. Like Pádraig Walsh, we know he can snap ball for sport over most people. But I expect that Chris Crummy should be able to get a bit of joy. I think Sutcliffe's always a good option. Keane Boland's got pace. Matty Kenny will be looking to open up spaces for pacey players to move into, to sort of collect ball from puck outs. So I think they do have a lot to work with. I don't see them being too far away. I could be wrong. I think Kilkenny will ultimately edge it, but I just don't think it'll be a foregone conclusion. And I also think it's going to be war. I think it's going to be brilliant to watch. And you know what I'm looking forward to? I'm looking forward to being able to hear the management calling in at the players. Like I'd much rather crowds were there, don't get me wrong. But one of the things on Saturday night is I could hear Matty Kenny shouting at his Dublin players and saying this is what the tackle rate is and this is what we needed by half time. I'm looking forward to hear what Brian Cody has to say to his Kilkenny players. So yeah, imagine Brian Cody would be spitting fire. He's had 7 or 8 months without a competitive hurling match, and I'd say it'd be interesting. Hopefully, it'll be hot and heavy early, and yeah, I do expect it. It's in Croke Park. Obviously, it's going to be massive spaces, maybe whereas there wouldn't be in provincial grounds, but. Between the 265s, it'll be absolutely jam-packed. Yeah. There'll be bodies absolutely everywhere. And Dublin kind of showed that even the other night against Laois. there was one stage a Laois defender was trying to come out with the ball, and there must have been about 8 Dublin boys in a small little area around him just carding him off. So yeah, no, that should be very, very interesting. Just what you said about the Dublin attackers, there's just more kind of questions and ifs and buts about them than, like, is TJ Reid going to deliver? Yes. Is Colin Fennelly going to deliver? Yes, to some extent. Maybe not to the same at club level. If Richie Hogan is playing, is he going to contribute a couple of points? Yes, more than likely, I would say. Walter Walsh, yes. I just think there's an awful lot less question marks about Kilkenny, and I think they'll cover the 5-point spread here.
Wow. Yeah, you could be right, but I still expect a performance from Dublin here. Galway against Wexford. Arguably, like, on any normal week, this would be absolutely mouthwatering. Everyone would be talking about, but there's so many big games that they're all kind of clamouring for attention. This is like, I can see this being like as full-blooded a match as you will ever see. Wexford have Galway have had their number in the past couple of years in general. They had a very close game last year. Galway won 123 to 17 points in 2018. 2017 they won the Leinster final. This is Shane O'Neill's first championship game in charge. Has he had enough time to put a stamp on things?
I think he was only getting his stamp on things just before things finished up. Their last game before lockdown was that brilliant performance against Tipperary in Salt Hill. And I think they were beaten by Limerick in a challenge game since then, and they had one other challenge game as well. And there's question marks about, like, we were asking all year where he was going to play Davey Burke. Like, there's only going to be one place he's going to play him, I'd say now, if he is fit to play, and that's full back, because there's too many question marks about him. But saying that, you could say the flip argument and say, if he has, a calf injury, the last place you want him is full back. The last place you want him is on a fast foot forward, and maybe you put him out the field. I'd be leaning towards that he's less likely to play than likely. I would say somehow, just from the general kind of vibes I've been getting. It's very, very difficult to put your stamp on things in that length of time. So he was a late enough appointment. He was finished. They were finished up in March. Then they were back. The Galway County final was played on, I think, October 4th, was it? And the Wexford County final was played on August the 23rd. Now, a good few of those Wexford lads were obviously kicking football, but you would imagine that Davey has had more time, and it's his 4th year. So I think they know exactly what they're supposed to do. Just from chatting to a couple of people close to the camp, when Galway played Limerick in a challenge game, it was very clear to see what Limerick were doing. It was less clear to see what Galway were doing, and I think that was clear even at the league game we were at earlier on this year. Weren't really kind of sure what way they were playing. So they've had it, like, when you're not sure about what way you're playing, I'd say they'll probably go fairly direct. I'd say they'll go to a game plan that's probably not that complicated. That's kind of what I'm expecting at the weekend. Kilkenny, or Galway, I should say, have caused Wexford an awful lot of trouble in recent years, and have put up big scores against them, probably last year aside, when there were 16 points apiece down in Salt Hill, and you rarely get kind of big high scoring games in Salt Hill anyway. But they've caused them an awful lot of trouble in recent years, and it'd be interesting to see what way kind of Davey goes about it. I think last year they played to try and get a result, and they got one. Whereas this year you wonder, like, will he be really going after the win, or will he, like, it's not a round robin thing now, so they have to go after it. You're not playing to try and contain them, you're playing to try and put your stamp on the game. So I think it's going to be really, really interesting. Galway's size profile obviously is a massive plus at this time of the year too. It's a huge game for both, and I said it's kind of maybe been overlooked this weekend because there's so many other things going on around it, but it's a massive game for both. Leinster final place obviously at stake. I just think Wexford, they're a small bit better place, just because I think they know what they have to do, and they have their game plan fairly well honed at this stage. Whereas Galway, it's a bit up in the air what way exactly they're playing.
The thing with Davey though is, can he get consecutive seasons where they're really, really strong? So 17 they made great progress, 18 felt like a bit of a backward step, 19 huge jump on again, winning Leinster and obviously getting to an All-Ireland semi-final and performing pretty well on the whole there. With Clare, there was some up and down seasons, and I'd say you could to some degree say similarly with Waterford. At times did really well, pushing Kilkenny close in All-Ireland semi-finals, but up and down. There would have been big defeats here and there. We all remember that 21-point defeat to Tipperary in 2011 as an example. But that's the thing, can he get that consistency? Can he take him on to the next level? That would be a question. Whereas with Galway, I just feel like you've got players that are coming fairly close to the point of, going the wrong side of the hill. They have a couple of key players who are 31, 32, still operating at the top level and could win an All-Ireland this year. Like Joe Canning has even talked recently about he's not really sure how long more his body has. He's had so many injuries the last few years, whether it's his knee, whether it's his groin last year, whatever it might be. So I think the determination on his side of things would be absolutely massive. Davey Burke the same. He's already captained the team to an All-Ireland. But they've probably got a team that's fairly close to the peak. I think Pádraig Mannion is an absolute leader. I think Cathal Mannion has got scores in him. And actually that's one thing, those two brothers coming up against the O'Connor brothers, Rory and Jack. Which is the better set of brothers?
Well, Jack and Rory they've probably got about 10 years of inter-county hurling ahead of them, whereas you'd probably say the Mannions wouldn't have, that as much time over them. They probably have done more, I'd say, at inter-county level as well.
Jeez, I don't know is there much of an age difference between them. Maybe the Mannions are about 2 years older each.
They're a bit older than that.
Someone will correct us.
Pádraig Mannion's about 26 or 27 to the best of my knowledge. Cathal's a couple of years younger. They've done more at county level. Like Cathal was an all-star. I'm going to say in his first year at inter-county level in 2015, he was an all-star. The year they got to the All-Ireland final. Pádraig Mannion was obviously in the conversation for Hurler of the Year in 18. He was nominated in 18 as well. He's probably the mainstay of their defence. While people will talk about Davey Burke at fullback, he's probably, I would say, nearly the most, even particularly in bad times, I think he was consistent. Last year, he was very good last year, even though Galway maybe weren't going particularly well at times. It was with Jack O'Connor. I remember seeing him in a Leinster under-21 final against Offaly. It was the day that Cathal Dunbar got that Samba hurling goal with the flick from Conor McDonald, and Kevin Foley was in the middle of it as well. And I just remember thinking, this lad has endless potential. He was actually playing wing back that day. He's obviously graduated as a forward now, but like he has so many of the characteristics that you want in a big inter-county player, a big leader of a team. And like this year, next year, kind of big years for him, because you're just expecting it probably to happen. We've talked about the discipline before. Discipline has been an issue. That's obviously something that he's going to have to just eradicate, because you just can't be, you're a loose cannon for your team if you're getting sent off. But like, then you throw him, like Rory has so much potential. Particularly with games going to be played in Croke Park. Just the space involved. A couple of his best performances, like the Leinster final last year, he was brilliant. He had that kind of match-winning play as well to win the penalty for Mark Fanning, which he scored. That's an interesting kind of a duel. I'd probably take the Mannions just because I think they've done a bit more at county level. But I think the other two, over a longer period of time, could have more potential. But that's a seriously interesting duel.
Yeah, Roy O'Connor's a great scorer and carrier of the ball, and Jack O'Connor, like you said, she's what a ball winner, powerful running up the centre, even taking frees earlier on in the year. I saw him at one point. Yeah. But give me the Mannion brothers at the moment. I think Pádraig has probably been arguably the best leader in hurling over the last 3 or 4 seasons. I think he should have been in the Hurler of the Year conversation in both 17 and 18. I couldn't rate him highly enough. And look at what Cathal Mannion did last year down at Nolan Park. They didn't have Joe Canning. And what was it he scored from play? Something like 7 points from play, something ridiculous that. Yeah.
He actually got man of the match that day, and we call TJ's performance probably one of the greatest individual performances of all time. He got the official RT man of the match that day.
Yeah, we'll come to another aspect, or situation like that, where Tony Kelly got man of the match last week, but maybe Grode Hegarty should have got to. We'll come back to that in a while. But I think Pádraig Mannion, a guy who suffered against Seamus Callan a number of years ago in that semi-final, I think now, in a latter stage of his career, that if Davey Burke isn't available to play and they don't want to throw Grode McInerney back there and they don't want to throw Fintan Burke back there, they probably have a far more seasoned campaigner who could go back there and do the exact job. So that's something worth keeping an eye on. Free taking is another aspect that you can't ignore. Joe Canning isn't going to miss his frees. He so rarely misses any frees. Lee Chin had a very good season on the place balls last year. But I don't like the last couple of years before that. You could have had 5, 6, 7 different lads taking frees for Wexford over a few games. So he needs to ensure that he's still hitting the mark with all of those. So now, if you're going to call it, gun to the head, who are you going with?
Yeah, it's one of those games. Galway are 8-11, Wexford 11-8. Like, it's one of those games where you would not be in any way surprised if Wexford won the game. I definitely wouldn't be. I think it's probably closer to a coin toss than that, I would say. And you mentioned about like it being a war or a battle zone in that middle third. So intrigued. You know, Davies had 7 or 8 months to kind of stew and think tactically about what he'd do, and he knew he was playing Galway from a long way out. Like, you could see a case where he has his forwards lined up along the 65, a throw in just to kind of cause consternation, this kind of thing. I just think it's going to be really interesting. I think it could be potentially be a bit of a stop-start kind of a game, and I think there's going to be an awful lot of bodies in around the middle. I'm not expecting either team to be getting up to like not like 126 or 127 or anything like that. I think this could be in terms of scoring at the moment, I think it could be one of the lower scoring games, even though it's in Croke Park. I think it's going to be, I think all scores will be really, really hard got, particularly obviously because Wexford are going to be playing the 7th man back. Aidan Hart will probably start for Galway and sit back as the 7th man. I think it's seriously intriguing. Like Limerick and Tip is, you know, unbelievably interesting as well. But from a tactical point of view, I think this is probably the most intriguing game of the weekend. And I'm gonna go at Wexford. I'm gonna go at Wexford from the continuity standpoint, from the fact that Davey is back for a 4th year. We said what's progress for Wexford. I know you don't agree, but I think the only progress for me is for Wexford to get to an All-Ireland final or to win an All-Ireland final. I think that's progress this year. And I just think in terms of that continuity and knowing what they're trying to do, I just think they have that edge over Galway, and they'll just probably edge it by 1. I'd say 1 or 2. I think they'll just edge it.
Yeah, it's a mouth-watering game. I would say a puck of the ball between the teams, just like you were saying. I'm going with Galway because I think Joe Canning's going to have a big game, and Matt O'Hanlon will of course go on him, but I can see him stepping in centre forward, wing forward, and I think this is going to be a big game for him. I also think that Conor Whelan is going to have a massive say. He generally does. I'm interested to see if Evan Nyland gets his chance, having done so well in the league, particularly in that game against Tipperary. Similarly, will Brian Kincannon get his shot? And it is the first game for Shane O'Neill at this level. But I always rated him when he was manager of Na Piarsaigh, so I think he's the perfect man to step in for them at the moment. And it's funny, like when you go back to last winter, we were talking about Galway in negative terms, and you had, you know, their sponsors Supermax coming out making statements against the county board and all this kind of stuff. But all that stuff is gone now, and it's just what's going to happen out in the field. And if you've got a team that, let's assume Davey Burke is available, you've got him, you've got Pádraig Mannion, you've Gerard McInerney, you've got Davey Burke, Joe Canning, Conor Whelan, and then, you know, Conor Cooney can come in, potentially shoot the lights out. There's an awful lot of class in that Galway team. Just because they got knocked out last year, I mean, I don't necessarily think that means they're a fading force. So give me Galway, but only by a puck of a ball. Just
2 things on what you said there, Shane. We talked about Owen O'Donnell and Colin Fennelly potentially coming up against each other. Liam Ryan and Conor Whelan coming up against each other is like another. You might as well have a matador standing there with the red kind of blanket. It's just going to be absolute carnage. It'll be brilliant. And as well as that, you mentioned about Galway too. There will be a sense that they won their All-Ireland in 2017. It's 3 years later. Time is running out. Time is running out for a good handful of them, and they are perfectly suited. Their physical profile is perfectly suited for winter hurling. So I think they'll see this as a really good opportunity to kick on.
And by the way, just to mention that Conor MacDonald, if he's in against someone who isn't used to playing fullback, he could do damage. So I mean, that's something to keep an eye on as well. And it's one of the many reasons that it's a fascinating game. As is Cork Waterford in the Munster semi-final. We haven't seen these teams out, obviously, since the league at this point. But Cork, they've pace everywhere, but do they have bottle? You like to question it.
No, I'm still of the opinion that I think that they could get gobbled up a bit in wintry conditions, or with kind of a heavier ball. It's not going to move as fast. It's not going to be as slick. We even saw that in Thurles last week. It's not going to be. Thurles was probably a bit kind of heavier maybe than a Croke Park would have been. It's hard to get your kind of legs moving. It's hard to play that. Even we saw Limerick's kind of free flowing style broken down a bit, even in conditions the other day. And you just wonder, particularly in attack, where are the leaders in the sense of who are the people that are going to get their hands on the ball? Are we more likely maybe to see an Aidan Walsh style of player, someone that can maybe win a puck out, whether he starts wing forward or whether he starts midfield? We're going to see him drifting in for puck outs. It's going to be really interesting. As we mentioned in other podcasts, other shows, this is a glorious opportunity for either of them to get to a Munster final. Like for Waterford, what's progress? Winning a match, winning a championship match is progress this year. And I think Liam Cahill would take their hand off if they could win the first game and get to a Munster final, regardless of what happens after that. They haven't beaten anyone in championship since they beat Cork 3 years ago in the All-Ireland semi-final. So it's a massive carrot dangling for both teams, I would say. And I think Cork come into this in a kind of a precarious kind of a position. They're heavy enough favourites. They're expected to win by most people, obviously, according to the odds. There's not that much pressure on Waterford. They have a new manager. They're missing a couple of players. And I think it's a dodgy enough spot for Cork. And have Cork responded that well to being favourites in recent years? I'm not so sure.
Not only that, people expect Kieran Kingston to come back in and be the Messiah. He had a very good season in 2017. But let's not ignore the fact that they lost to Wexford in the championship the year before, and that wasn't the Wexford team that it is now, and it was like their first loss to them in, what was it, something like 40 years at the time. I'm sure someone will correct me on the exact amount of years. But the way they faded out in that 2017 All-Ireland semi-final against Waterford, I know they got a red card, but as we saw last year with Tipperary getting a red card, your performance doesn't necessarily need to go to bits just because you're gone down a man. I think that Liam Cahill is going to turn the ship for Waterford. I expect them to have a fairly good performances. I don't think they'll get hammered by anybody whatsoever. And
I tell you what, Shane, there won't be a walkover.
Yeah,
there won't be a walkover.
And they won't be far away here because, like you're talking about Cork being built up, Owen Cadigan, he's not available. He's got a back injury. Darragh Fitzgibbon has a hamstring injury. So that's probably one of the most physical players in a team where physicality is being questioned. He's been taken out. Darragh Fitzgibbon, a scorer from anywhere in the field, like he's one of these guys who can kind of break your heart in the sense that he could collect the ball on his own 65 at pace, solo 50 yards if he wanted, burn out a defender's legs for the next 2 or 3 minutes because he's going so hard after him, and knock it over the bar anyway. Robio Flynn is another really good player that I like, and his pace, he's not available because he's suspended from that league game against Galway, I think back around maybe March. So, like, who steps in? Like, is Tim O'Mahony going to go in here? Does he go into the backs? Does he go into midfield? Have they found a position for him? What about Mark Coleman? Obviously has the talent. Is he going to be wing back, midfield? Is he, because that's the other thing. We haven't really necessarily seen a settled half back line, a settled midfield line. And then, of course, now you're taking Owen Cadigan out of full back line. So, I think there's a lot for Liam Cahill to exploit.
Just on that, Shane, right? You talk about all the good hurlers that Cork have and all the forwards that will shoot the lights out. And I would say a lot of this game will depend on how someone like Bill Cooper plays. Genuinely. I actually think, because it's no more than what people used to say about Bonner Matter with Tip. That kind of real physical, abrasive player, a lot will depend on the tone that he is able to set, or the tone that he's allowed to set, or if he's able to kind of stamp that his authority on the game. And a lot will depend on someone like Seamus Harnedy as well. If he's able to get on a couple of puckouts and win some kind of direct ball. You mentioned about Brian McDonald, the piece he did obviously for the Examiner. He had stats out from last year's All-Ireland Championships. And I think this is a very, very pertinent kind of point when you're talking about Cork.
It's damning.
Cork were only ahead of Westmeade in terms of work rate. So they were 11th of the 12 teams assessed in terms of work rate, and they were bottom of the Rucks 1 category, which is such a massive component of the game now. So if they're not getting ball into that full forward line directly and they're getting on nice ball, they're in trouble. You looked at it last year, Kilkenny dropped a load of men behind the ball last year when they were in trouble in the quarter-final. They just snuffed out that inside line because Cork were struggling in a lot of other lines. They kind of brought them into the trenches, and Cork basically didn't respond. And that game was over in 10 or 15 minutes. I remember chatting to Alan Cadigan, which is probably maybe January or February this year, and I forget how many minutes it was. I'm going to say it was 12 minutes, but it was basically like 12 minutes of misery at the start of the second half, where Cork went from like 4 or 5 up to basically been beaten. And I don't know if that's something that you can turn around by just a manager coming in. I'm not sure if they have those types of players, those real abrasive players that can win that kind of dirty ball that we talk about. And that would be my biggest kind of worry for them. I don't think winter conditions will suit them. I don't think they have those type of players in their arsenal. So I'd be, from a Cork point of view, I'd be definitely very, very worried going into Sunday, because a lot of the pressure is on, and I don't think they've done enough to have that confidence in them over the last couple of years. There's been a result here and a result there. Like if you look at it, they beat Limerick last year and they should have beaten them in the All-Ireland semi-final probably the year before. But outside of that, like, you know, what have they done? They sleepwalked their way into the All-Ireland quarter-final last year, having been hammered by Clare down in Cusack Park. So I'd have worries for Cork definitely going into the weekend.
Yeah, so would I. I think Cork GA fans are going to cancel you at this stage. They're basically going to blot you out, unfollow you because you've just slated them so hard. But to be fair, right, there is that perception that they're a top of the ground team, that they're seeing when you're winning, they'll put scores on you when they're on top. And that is something that they have to face up to. Because like that, you're right, that game against Kilkenny last year, when Kilkenny sat back, the half forwards came out, flooded the middle area of the field. They had no response, and they just started hitting the ball up to free men, the Kilkenny halfbacks that held their position. And, you know, the really damning part is that once they went behind, there never felt like there was any suggestion that they could make a late comeback here. I mean, Alan Cadigan had started the game well. He'd given an awful lot of bother to that full back line. We know about Pat Horgan scoring 310. He's obviously going to have to be a key man again. He's 33, he's 32, he's 33 next May. And they're still relying so heavily on him. And, you know, we know that other players have to come up to his level at this point. They have a star-studded forward line potentially. But I wonder, is this going to be a game where Aidan Walsh, who started, if I remember correctly, against Kilkenny early in the year, he started full forward. And he got a bit of joy in the first half. Now, the entire team got no joy in the second half, as is so often the case in that particular matchup. But I wonder, is this a year where Aidan Walsh can stand up, you know, assuming that he's fit and ready to go? Because you'd like to think that he could win you some primary ball, that he could win some dirty ball, that he could solo up the centre, so that he could be a key man. And let's not forget, Liam Cahill's teams with Tipperary, they've had an awful lot of joy over Cork the last couple of years. And I think Waterford, in a general sense, don't fear Cork. So all this perception out there that Cork are massive favourites and it's only a case of showing up, I wouldn't necessarily see it as being all that accurate.
Well, it's like this, Shane. What Cork turns up? If the Cork turns up that played Tip last year and let them put up an absolute cricket score on them in the first round of the Munster Championship turns up, they're in big bother. If the Cork team turns up that came up against Limerick a week later in the Gaelic grounds, that totally got in Limerick's faces, that put their stamp on the game from the start, then there's only one winner. Cork will win. But I definitely, with Cork, I just have to see it to believe it, to be honest with you. And the fact that they're favourites going into the game, like I put it this way, they were written off almost against Limerick last year. They were under pressure. They had a point to prove coming in. Now they should have a point to prove coming in this year because there was a massive fade out against Kilkenny last year and they were physically dominated. But I'm just not sure if they have those type of physical players. From a Waterford point of view, I'm not 100% sure if Waterford have them either. Like, you're probably looking at maybe someone like maybe Kevin Moore and Stephen Bennett in attack. I believe Conor Prunty's back fit again, which would be massive. Conor Prunty probably pick up Pat Horgan, and he did a very good job in him earlier on this year in the league as well. Conor Gleason doesn't look like he's going to be fit, out with the hamstring injury. Again, I don't think this will be that high scoring. I don't think this is going to be 225 to 224. I think it'll be more of a dogfight, particularly because, you know, well, conditions weren't too bad during the week, but Thurles will be heavy enough, the sod will be heavy enough. I think this is another, like we said about all the games so far, it's seriously intriguing as well. And the carrot for both teams is so big. I'd have a slight fancy for Waterford, I have to say, even though Pádraig Matney is missing. If almost it adds to the intrigue with them even more. They've even more of a kind of a point to prove now. And as I said, what's progress for them? Winning a championship game. And I think they'll give it a fair rattle on Sunday.
Yeah, I can see, well, and I'd hope to see Austin Gleason given a free role. As like most teams, they'll probably play with two inside. Allow him to be the man. Roam, go wherever you want, Austin. Go wherever you want, because a bit like Conor McKenna for Tyrone at the moment in the football, let's not just give too much instruction. We know we've probably got arguably the most talented player on the field. Just let him go out and do his thing. Put him under puck outs, tell him come back, get the ball, solo through. I don't want him in defence, because Austin Gleason is probably going to end up taking 5 or 6 shots in the game, whether he's wing back, whether he's centre back, or whether he's wing forward. or that free roll in the forward line. If he's up there in that forward line, he's more likely to be shooting from inside 60 yards of goal, whereas if he's wing back, he might be often shooting from 90 yards. So I think the accuracy is gonna absolutely shoot up. So I think Waterford can do this. Yeah, I don't think there's a massive reason why not. Just a very quick look at where the scores originate. We're looking at a lot of Brian McDonald stuff, but he's very worth looking, and you can check him out on Twitter at 642. But it's just where did the scores originate from, and I thought it was quite interesting looking at the likes of Tipperary, Cork and Carlow here. For Tipperary, shots or the percentage of shots that were created from the opposition puck out, it was higher than anybody, 21%, yet from their own puck out it's only 19%. So that was quite an interesting juxtaposition. Looking at Cork here, a huge amount of scores from their own puck outs, 30%, only 16 from the opposition. And then they really stood out with Carlow, that 42% of the scores or the shots originated from their own puck outs. Now, let's see how that plays out at the weekend.
Just on that as well, I do think Waterford will go after, if Nash is in goals in particular, that what's one of the ways of stopping Cork? You don't think they have a load of ball winners, so if you can stop their puck out and stifle their puck out, you'd imagine they'd be in trouble. And those stats where they get 36% of scores from their own puck out would definitely suggest that. So I think Liam Catlett definitely go after that as well.
Yeah, without doubt. So Tipperary against Limerick, the clash of the 2019 and 2018 All-Ireland champions. We know last year Tipperary won the dead rubber clash in Munster, and then Limerick razed Tipperary to the ground then in the Munster final. And it was a real case of Tip did really well for the first 20 minutes, and by 10 minutes, 5 minutes even into the second half, you knew this game was over and it was just a case of playing out time. Seamus Callanan was talking about all the different things being put up to players at the moment in terms of the circumstances, and he goes, whether it be a sliotar, the lights, no crowd, whatever it is, you have to have yourself in a good space to deal with all these things. Now, do you think going into this game that it's a simple case of look at the Munster final last year and assume that the same thing is going to happen? Because I certainly don't think so.
No, not at all. It's a completely different Tipperary team. I think Tipperary learned an awful lot from that Munster final last year. I think they learned that their players needed to be more kind of versatile. The fullback needed to be able to play cornerback, and maybe looking at someone like James Barry, he was at the edge of the square, but he wouldn't maybe be suited to playing cornerback, whereas Ronan Matter could easily play cornerback and could play fullback. He could play centre back, he could play wing back. You could say the same about Barry Heffernan. You could say the same about Brendan Matter. You could probably say the same. Paddy could play 5, 6 or 7. So I think they've definitely become an awful lot more versatile, and I think they've realised that they need really, really athletic players, particularly in defence. That would definitely be my takeout. So, I don't think it's exact. You can't just go back and look at the Munster final. I think they're chalk and cheese, really.
Do you know there were some interesting stats on one of the key forwards for Limerick from last week? So, Gearóid Hegarty was my man of the match. Tony Kelly was absolutely sensational, and you could make do you know what, he probably was man of the match really, because he's in a team that ultimately got battered and he didn't have any support around him. But Gearóid Hegarty's stats were absolutely unbelievable. I'm just going to bring him up on screen here. Paul Ryan at Know Your Hurling had it. He had 31 involvements in the game, won a couple of frees, 20 possessions, won 4 turnovers, scored 5 points as well. Now you've named out some of those versatile backs for Tipperary. And I wonder about the matchups if we look at Kyle Hayes, Tom Morrissey and Gearóid Hegarty either side of him. Brendan Maher will probably pick up one, unless he goes fullback on Aaron Gillan and reprises the role from last year. Will Paddy Maher go on one of those? Seamus Kennedy isn't available, so does John Maher get sprung in? Does Alan Flynn get sprung in there somewhere and maybe pick up Peter Casey, assuming he starts? There are certain mismatches that I think that Limerick can exploit here. Peter Casey did okay last week, but I can see Seamus Flanagan being used here, because let's say Tipperary brought in Alan Flynn. It's a bit of a size mismatch that Limerick can avail of there, whereas Flynn might be more suited to Peter Casey. Like, Paddy Maher had a tough time last year when Limerick pulled them all over the place, and the likes of those 3 half forwards that I talked about can get in behind you and run. So I just wonder how Tipperary are going to set up to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, Paul Ryan put it out there on Twitter. He just said, do Tip put a man marker on Gearóid Hegarty? I can't see it, being honest with you, just because, just say they do put Brendan Matter on him, and he follows him everywhere. You're potentially leaving, a flank free. I know they wouldn't be naive enough to leave a flank free, but that's potentially what you're doing. I don't see them doing that. You mentioned about John Matter there. It'd be a fair baptism of fire to come in wing back on one of those guys, and plus.
But he's a warrior. He is a warrior, and he's athletic, and he can cover the ground, which you'll need to do against Limerick.
He is a warrior. From what I've seen of him, though, I think he's more suited to a kind of a direct style of a game where ball is coming down and he's, contesting ball in the air and maybe bursting out with ball. Whereas if he's going to be playing at the weekend, he's going to have to be covering massive ground, kind of covering those two half forwards in particular. Actually, it doesn't like the fact that Limerick have Flanagan is a massive one as well, because he offers a physicality that causes different questions for the Tipperary defence. And to have that kind of an outlet there. Now, David Dempsey wasn't in the 26th last week, whether he was injured or not, I'm not sure. Someone like him would offer more questions maybe coming in from an aerial kind of prowess kind of point of view as well. But the matchups there are tantalising, really, aren't they?
Yeah.
And it's, yeah.
Would you go at last year and say, considering the pressure he was under at fullback, Brendan Maher on Aaron Gillan works fairly well for Tipperary. I expect Tip to compete a bit better for longer in this game. In fact, I expect it to be a puck of a ball in the game by the very end. So would you say, do you know what, we're not going to leave Brendan Maher as exposed at full back this year, but we're going to go with that matchup again because we like it, and we know Ronan Maher can play in the half back line, so we'll put him out there. But I still think if Seamus Kennedy is unavailable, that's a big one. And we saw Barry Heffernan limp out for Nina towards the end of the championship with an ankle injury. So you'd hope that he's right at this stage if you're following Tipperary. So I think Barry Heffernan could possibly do a good man marking job, maybe snuffing out one of those half forwards for Limerick, or as good as you can do. Paddy Maher, assuming that Tip are able to hold their shape somewhat and not leave oceans of space around him, that he'd be able to sort of, especially on puck outs, he should be able to break even with any man he's up against. And then maybe Ronan out there with them. So, and then also actually, if I could add in, I think Bonner Maher, assuming he's going well in training, could start in the half forward line, and Dan McCormack moved to midfield to try and do a man marking job on Keane Lynch, which Colin Malone did relatively well, I would say, last week for Clare.
And Bonner also offers that physicality and that athleticism that he could possibly like half snuff out one of their half forwards and fill that space that Tom Morrissey fills, or fill that space that Garrod Hegarty fills as well. Another important point, Cathal Barrett didn't play the Munster final last year, and we know how dynamic he is in the defence. He offers a different kind of a tactic for them as well. Like, would he pick up a Peter Casey? You'd love to see a battle like that. It'd be definitely very, very interesting. Graham Mulcahy as well. Yeah. Do you know, like you can just see Barrett. You can just see Barrett showing Mulcahy to his left side and trying to get him to throw the ball up in his face. You could just see him and possibly maybe frustrating him as well. There's some really, really interesting duels there. Some seriously interesting duels.
I've heard talk of Craig Morgan, the Killer One man and an under-20 captain, that he might be from last year, that he might be in position to maybe get a run here. So I'll be interested to see that. What about the idea of Bonner going centre forward on Declan Hannon? Because Declan Hannon, pure hurler, but would he like someone like that bowling ball running at him time after time?
Yeah, they could do that. They could also put John McGrath out there and have him plant his feet out around the middle of the field and try and score 4 or 5 from play. They could possibly do the same with Noel and switch him into centre forward at different stages as well and try and get him to punish that way. I don't think there'll be any game this year, unless the two of these play each other again, where the matchups will be more intriguing, because there's so many things that you're just unsure about. And just a quick thing on Limerick's accuracy and their shots from last weekend. So there was some brilliant stats by Johnny Bradley on Twitter. Really, really good. So Limerick had 51 shots, which is unheard of for a championship game, and it's 71% accuracy, which is also unheard of. Usually you're talking about something around the 58% accuracy will win you most championship games. And I thought it was interesting because there is a lot of conversation about the lighter ball. I am an advocate. I do think the ball is a small bit light, given the advances in the games with hurling technology, how much better hurls are, how much stronger lads are as well. But it's just interesting to see that every Limerick point came from outside of their own 65. And that might be contrary to what people think. It looks like they're scoring from their own 45 or whatever. They took on 2 shots between their 45 and their 65. Both went wide. They took on anything from the 65 up. The majority of them went over the bar. And for Clare, actually, last week, they shot 69% accuracy and still lost the game, which is phenomenal. But they only had 35 shots. Tip will be definitely trying to make sure. Limerick are going to create more chances than most teams they play. They are. That's just the way it is. Tip will obviously try and reduce that. And on the other side, one thing we haven't said is that the rookies in the Limerick full back line, I think Tip will definitely try and go after them. They'll think if they can get 2 or 3 goals, they have a great chance of winning the game. And you'd imagine if they do get 2 or 3 goals, that they do have a great chance of winning.
Yeah, and just to refer back to Johnny Bradley's stats there again, if you look at where Limerick are generally scoring from, there's a high concentration from their left wing. So Tipperary will certainly be looking to populate that right wing back area and the cornerback situation as well. If they can lock down that side, that forces Limerick to look in another direction. Now, Gerard Hegarty played on the other wing, and he was coming short a lot and hitting these lovely crossfield balls that really kind of, I think, exposed Clare at times, and he'd be looking to feed the full forward line again. Like, locking down Gerard Hegarty now, he's got Hurler of the Year form going at the moment, but you also have to lock down Keane Lynch. You also have to lock down Declan Hannon and make sure he's not on the front foot. So Tipperary,
who does Will O'Donoghue pick up?
Possibly Noel McGrath. And we saw
interesting. Yeah,
we saw the impact that Will O'Donoghue made in the league game earlier this year. League is league, yeah. But he came in, he turned that game around. He set up 2 goal chances, got himself red carded as well. But like, he can be such a dominant player here. But that full back line for Limerick, if Tipperary don't manage to expose that, they're probably not going to win the game. And Seamus Callan, I'm sure, will be in there. And after that, it's anyone's guess who's in there with him. Like, will Bubbles be used? Like, people always have this idea that he's top of the ground hurler, he's built for Croke Park on a sunny day. And yes, that is true. So can he do it here? Or will they be more inclined to say, Jake Morris, some of your form has been unbelievable at different stages. We're going to throw you in. You scored a hat-trick against Thurles in the Tipperary quarter-final. He didn't have a great Munster final last year. Nobody had a great Munster final last year. Like, will Michael Breen get into the team here because of his physicality? There's so many question marks in the Tipperary side, but question marks where it's a selection headache, because they can also throw in Jason Ford, and they can also look at, like, Keane Darcy got a run during the league as well. There's probably other players that I haven't even mentioned so far. So from the Tip point of view, there are so many players that they can use.
You have realistically the best 2 panels coming up against each other as well. The two teams with the greatest depth, and like, if ever a game kind of whets your appetite for what's going to come over the next 6 weeks, this is it, because this could easily be part 1 of 2 great meetings this year, where they could potentially meet in an All-Ireland semi-final, or possibly even an All-Ireland final later on in the year. And after last weekend was not a slow burner, but it just got us into championship mood. We're getting so much this weekend. It's going to be seriously interesting. And just on the game, trying to call it, it's so difficult to call. Does Limerick having a game under their belt help? I think it probably does. Will they get the latitude that they were afforded last week? I can't see it. Yeah, I just can't see them getting that type of space, to be honest with you. I'm going to go with Limerick, but I'm going to go with a draw in normal time, and I'm going to go with Limerick getting the job done in extra time.
Back Tipperary on the penalties. That's all I'm saying. No, I think it's so tight. Puck of a ball either way. I go with Tipperary, but that could be hard to overhead. And you know what? We have to have a quick little chat. What's going to happen if Kerry win the Joe McDonagh? Do they have to have a playoff next year? You know, because we know that Leinster is going to 6 teams anyway. So if a team outside of Kerry basically wins it, they're going to go into the Leinster Championship next year. But there's no provision because of the year that's in it, and they obviously had to change the competitions. We don't know what's going to happen with Kerry, because we don't know. There was going to be a playoff that Kerry would play the bottom team after the Munster round robin. But sure, we don't know who the worst team is, because, you know, let's say Cork get knocked out in the semi-final. That's their first game. Are they therefore the worst team, or Clare because they got knocked out in the quarterfinal? We don't know.
No, to the best of my knowledge, there's nothing in place, and this would be one of these great things where, like, I'm sure this has been talked about in the Kerry dressing room. It definitely is. Like, they've nothing in place if Kerry win. There's no who they're going to play or what they're going to do. So I'm sure this is a massive motivation for Kerry. As well as this weekend, they play Westmeath. If they beat Westmeath this weekend, they could be knocking Westmeath out with a Joe McDonagh, the team who have been beaten in the first 2 Joe McDonagh finals, the only 2 Joe McDonagh finals. Westmeath got an awful shellacking up in Antrim last weekend. Brendan Murtaugh's out of retirement, which is a surprising one for me. He's 37. To say that they're going back to the well again, he's obviously an unbelievably good player, and he's played really well for Clonkill in recent years. But he's a selector who's now playing for them, which is a strange one for me. Westmeath have to get a result here to maintain their involvement. And Kerry were comfortable winners over Meade last weekend, and it's a huge game for them. This will be a massive game to show that they've kicked on a bit if they can win this. The other game in the Joe McDonagh then, Carlow, who were obviously in the Leinster Championship last year, like the only progress for Carlow this year is to get back up to the Leinster Championship next year. Nothing else will do. Colin Bonner stayed on maybe when people thought he wouldn't stay on. And they're coming up against an Antrim team who are absolutely flying. Kieran Clark was brilliant last weekend, 2-8 against Westmeath, 2-2 from play. They're prospering, as we said before, without Neil McManus, which would have been unheard of in other years for them to be doing so well without their star man. But they've a load of other lads kicking in there. James McNaughton, Keelan Malloy up front as well. This is a big probably step up for Antrim. But again, they'll have 1 foot probably in the final. If they beat the two main protagonists, which you would have said before, and they're probably Carlow and Westmeath, Antrim probably have 1 foot in the final if they can win this game.
They're doing all the right things. They won the Division 2A final a couple of weeks ago. To put 425 up on Westmeath, whether they're weakened or not, is great scoring. And if they can kick on again, to get up into the Leinster Championship next year, that would be a huge step in the right direction for them, and probably mean getting to a few games a little bit handier for manager Darren Gleason, who's based in Tipperary. And they had that challenge match in Tip a couple of weeks ago as well, so that you'd imagine that is standing to them at some point. And yeah, they've
and even the COVID stuff, Shane, like they had a COVID controversy and missing a couple of players, and it didn't knock a funk out of them last weekend. They were even better than they were the week before. So winning that 2A final is obviously giving them a great boost, and they look like they're going from strength to strength. And like Carlow are probably favourites going into that match. I haven't checked the odds, but would I be that surprised if Antrim won? No, I wouldn't. Yeah,
last week in the Christie Ring, Wicklow beat Roscommon 2-19 to 3-14. We know that Kildare against Offaly was called off because so many players in the Offaly camp were considered close contacts of a COVID case. This weekend we're going to see Down against Derry and Ballycran, so that's a repeat of the 2B final, which Down won a couple of weeks ago. The Sand Brothers, they're leading the way, Owen and Dahi, and Down got a walkover the first weekend, and Derry were idle. So Kildare against Wicklow, so David Herty's team, as I said, they got that walkover last weekend. An awful lot of young players in there, and then a couple of players who were a little bit older in there. Wicklow were 2-14 to 5 points up against Roscommon and nearly blew that lead. Christy Morehouse with 2-9. There's also, do you want to run through the Nicky record or any thoughts on the Christie Ring?
That'll be Kildare and Wicklow will be an interesting game. I'll probably be slightly favouring Wicklow with the fact that they have a game under their belt as well. Andy O'Brien wasn't playing last weekend. He's usually their main man up front. Not sure whether he's injured or off the panel at the moment, but they could do with him this weekend against Kildare. Down obviously beat Derry already. Probably just marginally be favouring them again. The Nicky record then, Donegal are playing Armagh. Now Declan Cotter limped out last weekend at half time. He obviously was Armagh's star man for years, and then he got married to a Donegal girl. It's actually Danny Cullen's sister, Danny, that has played with Donegal for the last good while. So he's now playing with Donegal, so there's a fair chance that Declan Cotter will be coming up against his old team. And it kind of got me thinking about players who ended up playing against their native county in championship. Ryan O'Dwyer will be one, obviously. Played with Tip under Babs. I think Babs brought him in, then played with Tip under Liam Sheedy as well. I think he missed out on the All-Ireland in 2010, I think.
He was on the panel earlier in the year, and then he went away to America for the summer, so he missed out on it. Yeah.
So he obviously ended up playing with Tip, playing for Dublin against Tip. There's a couple of other kind of high profile ones, like David Reedy with Limerick now at the moment. He obviously played with Kildare. They won. Did he win the Christie Ring? I'm not actually sure if he did. I don't think he did actually, no. And then he ended up coming back, played with Kildare in 17 in the Christie Ring, came back and won an All-Ireland with Limerick in 18, which is actually unbelievable, really. Any other lads that stand out for you, lads from their native county that ended up playing against maybe their own county even in championship?
Well, I think Andy Maloney did, just off the top of my head, because we're talking 18, maybe 19 years ago at this stage. Dennis Byrne, he moved over from Kilkenny to Tipperary. I think he was on the bench for that 2003 All-Ireland semi-final. And I'd say in the heel of the hunt after transferring back to back to Greg Ballycallan, he's probably happy enough that it worked out that way. But
I'd say there was war. There must have been war, like, without being smart now. Tip and Kilkenny, like, it's a great rivalry, but there's hatred to some extent.
The friendly derby.
Yeah, but for one lad, for to go to the opposite county, like, that's unheard of. It really is. It's pretty much unheard of. He must have got fair abuse. I must actually contact him, and we must do a little look back piece on it.
Yeah. And if there's anyone else we haven't thought of there, please let us know, and we'll come to it again in another show. So the Nicky Racker Cup this weekend. Well, first of all, we'll reflect on last weekend. Donegal 213, Longford 114, Mayo 322, Monaghan 210, Armagh 121, and Leitrim 12 points. So you mentioned Donegal, Armagh, Tyrone, Mayo. So Tyrone were idle last weekend, and Mayo scored 232 against Monaghan, with Shane Boland hitting 12 points, Carl Freeman firing 2-1. The Laurie Maher Cup last weekend, Fermanagh beat Louth by 310 to 115. This weekend, Fermanagh are against Cavan. So Fermanagh already have 1 foot in the final after beating Louth last weekend, as I said. And Fermanagh win, they're through. And it will come down to a semi-final game between Cavan and Louth to see who joins them in the final. And best of luck to a couple of my club mates who actually line out with Cavan. So I think a couple of the Shannons, I'm not sure which of them are playing with them this year. But Brian Breezer Fitzgerald, he's playing with them. This will be his championship debut, and I know how excited he is for this game. So best of luck to them lads there. That's nothing against them.
The boys fairly get around, don't they?
They do. There's a few of them that have played here, there and everywhere over the years. A few of them were togging out for Derry there for a while as well. So yeah, they like to get themselves around.
Between yourself, Darragh O'Connell, the former Kerry man, the two Waldrons, Breezer Fitzgerald, the Shannons, you could stay going. The boys have interest in several different camps.
Yeah, Nicky Kenny, Evan Hanley. Yeah, you've lads from all over the shop that are playing in different levels with Coola over the last few years. Right, we nearly have it all said, have we?
Yeah, there's some amount to look forward to, isn't there? Like those four marquee games are just like they're 4 separate highlights to one weekend. It's going to be class.
Yeah, it's going to be unbelievable. And just a reminder, we're brought to you by our sponsor, eFrontiers. Go to e-frontiers.com, and if you want to get your CV in, look, there's probably people out there looking to get work. Send in your CV to ourgame@e-frontiers.com. Thanks very much, Michael.
Cheers, Jen.